A polar bear, the only big predator on Earth built to hunt almost nowhere but sea ice. This is what happens when that ice breaks up before she's ready. Will she reach land before her strength does?
In the 1980s, the ice-free stretch on this bay averaged about 4 months. Today it runs closer to 5.5, and it's still getting longer. That gap in the ice doesn't just cost her hunting time, it decides whether the cubs she hasn't even had yet make it through their first year.
Out here, a polar bear doesn't just survive the cold. She survives the calendar. It isn't moving. It's waiting. A polar bear lies flat against the ice, beside a seal's breathing hole. So still, the snow hasn't shifted around her paws.
This ice stretches for miles in every direction, flat and white, still frozen solid enough to hold her weight. An Arctic fox trails her at a careful distance, smaller, faster, and running out of the same ice she is. By early summer, every mile of this will be open water. 40 years ago, that gap between freeze and thaw took about 4 months to open and close. Now it runs closer to 5.5, and this stretch of ice, the last solid ground she has, is exactly what she needs to put on enough fat to survive it.
A miss here doesn't just cost her a meal. Every week without a kill is a week of fat she won't have when the ice disappears completely. And this year, she needs enough to get through longer than her mother ever did.
Out past the ice edge, belugas are already gathering in the river mouth, waiting for exactly the thaw that will strand her on land.
Inland, caribou move across ground that will soon be the only ground she has left. Right now, though, there's just the hole in the ice, and the seal that has to come up for air eventually. The first attempt goes nowhere. A ripple at a different hole 40 yards off, and she's up and moving, but the seal is already gone before she covers half the distance. She resets at a second hole, lower now, wait forward, and waits again. This time the ripple is closer, and so is she, but the seal senses her at the last second and drops back into black water. The third hole is quieter. No ripple, no warning, just her paw already breaking the surface as the seal's head appears, and by the time the water settles, she isn't hunting anymore. That single seal won't carry her through the next 8 months, but it's a start. And every hunt like this between now and breakup is what decides whether she's carrying enough fat to disappear into a den at all. Because the moment the ice softens for good, this kind of hunting stops being an option. She isn't hunting anymore. Months after that last catch on the ice, she's dug down into a snowdrift on a low ridge inland and sealed herself inside it. And she hasn't eaten or had a drink of water since. Snow has drifted over the entrance until it's invisible from outside. In the dark and the cold, curled around herself, she's already burning through the fat she spent all autumn building. This is the most dangerous stretch of her entire life, and it hasn't even started yet. She'll give birth in here, in complete darkness, to cubs about the size of a guinea pig? Blind, nearly hairless, and utterly dependent on a mother who hasn't eaten in months. If she went into this den too thin, none of that changes what her body has to do next.
In the pitch dark of midwinter, she gives birth, not to one, but two, each barely 600 grams, eyes still sealed shut.
For the first weeks, they do nothing but nurse and sleep against the warmth of her body, while she stays curled around them, burning fat she has no way to replace.
By the time the den's faint light starts to change with the returning sun, they've already grown to 20 times their birth weight, and for the first time, they're strong enough to stand. Standing is not the same as safe. 3.5 months after they were born, she finally breaks the den open and steps back into daylight, with two cubs barely the size of small dogs trailing unsteadily behind her. And the moment she does, she stops being the only large predator they need to worry about.
She smells him before she sees him. A full-grown male, easily twice her cub's combined weight, working his way along the same ridge she's chosen to rest on.
An adult male has no interest in raising cubs, and every reason to see hers as a threat, a rival, or, in the worst case, a meal. Males have been known to kill cubs that aren't their own, especially when food is already scarce.
She can't outrun him in a straight fight. What she has is distance, timing, and knowing exactly how close is too close. She moves the cubs immediately, angling downwind and putting distance between them and his path, not fleeing outright, just making sure he never gets close enough for it to matter. When he lifts his head and changes direction toward them anyway, she plants herself between him and the cubs and holds her ground, ears back, weight low. He stops, reads her, and after a long moment, turns away toward the coast instead. He's headed toward the coast because there's nothing left inland worth staying for. And in a few weeks, she and the cubs will have no choice but to follow him there, onto the one strip of ground everyone in this bay ends up sharing. The last plate of ice she was standing on this morning is gone by afternoon. Not melted so much as broken apart and scattered. And what's left isn't solid enough to hold 3 bears' weight. There's a stretch of open water between here and the coast, and no way across it except through. With 2 cubs that have never swum this kind of distance, this crossing is the most dangerous stretch of open water she's faced all year. And it's happening earlier than it would have a generation ago, before that ice-free gap stretched to 5.5 months instead of 4. Get them across,
And there's a whole season of hard, thin foraging ahead. Don't? None of the rest of this matters. She swims first, cubs close against her flank, using her body to break the current for them, the way she's done since they left the den.
It takes most of the afternoon, but all three of them come out the other side, onto solid ground. What waits for them there isn't ice. It's a nesting colony of tens of thousands of snow geese, and she walks the shoreline from nest to nest, sometimes standing on her hind legs just to spot the next cluster across open ground. A run of days like this can add up to roughly 1/10 of everything she needs to eat in an entire year. Nowhere near a seal, but nowhere near nothing.
It won't be enough on its own. Eggs and grass and whatever else this shoreline offers will barely slow the weight loss, not reverse it. But it buys time. And time is the only thing standing between her cubs and the ice finally coming back. None of this happens in isolation. The ringed seals she depends on need that same ice to raise their own pups. Lose the ice, both species lose it together.
The Arctic fox, trailing her all winter, survives on what she leaves behind. And the snow geese, whose eggs get her through summer, keep nesting here regardless. Every one of them is reading the same calendar she is, just from a different angle.
So, how does a predator built to hunt only from sea ice survive the months when that ice, and almost everything she can eat, disappears completely? Not by finding a replacement for the ice, by stretching what little the land offers just far enough, just long enough to still be standing when the bay freezes again.